The only way to know any product that you're buying, whether it's produce or meat, is really to know the source that product is coming from and know their practices. People don't even remember, and it is a remembering. They don't remember how to raise animals on grass only, because for the last 50 plus years we've been doing it with grains. It definitely is the grass finished product that you're after, and that difference is big.
Most of us benefit from high quality animal protein, but how do you get it? Hi, this is Dr. Mercola, helping you take control of your health, and today we are joined by Joey Jones, who has been involved in the grass-fed beef world for over 17 years, and he created the grassfednetwork.com, which is an online resource and ongoing monthly trainings for livestock producers to improve the way they raise animals on grass. So welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Joey.
Thank you.
Can you give us some background of how you first became interested in the grass-fed beef business?
Certainly. I did not grow up as a rancher. I grew up in the city like a lot of people that will listen to this, but I went to college out of Texas Tech and started doing some ranching and farming while in college, and enjoyed the overall process. And when I did in West Texas, I was doing that in a county that had the second largest feedlot. The largest feedlot was one county away, and these are the largest feedlots in the country, still are today. And the smell of that was just horrendous, as most of us have smelled.
How far away could you smell it?
Well, now in Lubbock, and this wasn't even in the county. In Lubbock, there was a big feed yard that was southeast of town, and when the wind was blowing from that direction, it didn't matter what part of town you were in; the entire city could smell it, and it's just not a good smell. And if you ever driven by a large feed yard, and were unfortunate enough to have the windows down or not recirculating the air on your car, you've probably smelled it too. And that smell isn't a natural smell. You'll smell it from every feed yard, but it's not a natural smell. And I only know that now from working with a naturally raised animal that simply just don't have those smells. Those smells are sick animals is what those smells are. And, so when my wife and I started having children a bunch of years ago, we started an organic co-op. And as part of that, and that was about 18 years ago, as part of that, we brought in some grass-fed beef because it just made sense to feed animals in a natural way. And that was our foray into it. And the more involved I got, the more I realized people don't even remember, and it is a remembering. They don't remember how to raise animals on grass only, because for the last 50 plus years we've been doing it with grains, which was a supplement, and to get rid of grain. It wasn't to help the animal at all. It was simply to get rid of grain and surplus.
So, there's a lot of confusion about the term grass-fed, and I think in many cases it's an abused term, like the word natural.
No question.
That many producers of beef will use this because there's murky rules around it. And in my understanding is that most all cattle, when they're born as calves, are fed in grass, so they can, technically get away with it and say that. But the key is the finishing. So can you expand on that and maybe help us understand how to identify truly grass-fed and grass-finished beef?
You bet. And the only way to know any product that you're buying, whether it's produce or meat, is really to know the source that product is coming from and know their practices. I mean, it is true that all animals are fed grass at some point, unless it's a dairy animal. There are actually dairy animals that never see a blade of grass, which is really sad. But almost all beef animals are going to be on grass at some point in their life. It definitely is the grass finished product that you're after, and that difference is big. About 6 years ago, I did a study with one of my clients, and he had a herd of animals that he was taking to finish, and they were born in his place all the way to the finish. So we knew exactly where these animals were, what they had. At the very last of that process, about the last 3 months, we were selling those animals to two different grass-fed meat buying organizations. One of those organizations would accept DDGs as a supplement. What DDGs are simply the corn that has been processed in a refining process, and they've taken out the starch. So what's left is the dry matter from the corn. But since there's no starch, technically it qualifies as a grass-fed feeding supplement. So one group of these animals got about 2 pounds a day of the DDGs, and the other group didn't get any of that. They only got forages. At the end of that, when we processed those animals, sold those animals, we took a meat sample from both groups. And that 3-month period with just 2 pounds of DDGs, that's the only grain they had, and it is still a grain in my mind, even though the starch has been removed. That group had no health benefits left whatsoever in the meat, and the group that didn't get those DDGs still had all the health benefits that we expect from a grass-finished product.
And what would some of those benefits be, like the CLA, conjugated linolenic acid?
Exactly right. So you're looking at your lipid profile, at your CLAs and healthy fats, basically, saturated versus unsaturated, all those things that you've discussed many times. You're just looking for the healthy parts of that, and the positive numbers in getting your CLAs and omega-3s and all those. And in grass-fed beef, the omega-3 is kind of misunderstood as well. It's really it's the balance of the omega-3 and the omega-6 that makes it helpful. We have to have a balance of all things in life, and we need fats and those kinds of things. And many times the health benefits reside in the fat more than the meat itself and the muscle tissue.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why getting animal fat is such an important part of our diet, because there's this massive abuse of intake of vegetable oils. A century ago, we had a certain amount of omega-6, and now we have 100,000 times more intake of omega-6. So substituting some of that vegetable oils with healthy animal fat is going to be a lot better approach. But can you give us the lay of the land with respect to how most beef is produced in the United States, and sort of divide it up through the factory farm commercial beef industry versus the target that I believe you are seeking, which is the individual smaller farmer who's raising them on a grass-fed operation, and within that segment of the industry, the range of the size of the operations?
Sure. And that you're very accurate in that statement. There's not a lot of large-scale producers of grass-fed beef, though there are some. I think people would probably misunderstood what large-scale is. Most producers are going to have 100 or less head of animals, and they're only slaughtering 1 or 2 animals a month and selling it direct at the farmer's market or something like that. And that's great. That's perfect, and that's how you get to know your farmer and your rancher. But some of these operations do much more. 30 head a month, 3,000 head a year. There is a varying degree, but not a lot of large producers. Most statistically are going to have 100 animals or less. And that primary difference is going to be in the last 90 to 120 days of life. Beef animals, for the most part, are going to be raised on grass, although in a commercial operation, calves start getting supplemented with grain as soon as they get separated off from their mothers. So there is grain introduced very early on in the animal's life. So although they're out on grass, they're getting supplemented to a large degree by grain, whereas a grass-fed animal is only going to have, a true grass-fed animal is only going to have grass or forages throughout their life. And any growing plant is a forage for livestock. So we've also hurt ourselves, as I'm sure you're well aware, by doing a lot of monocultures. And so you go out and plant a whole pasture of coastal grass, for instance, or whatever it may be, instead of letting nature take its course and having a multitude of species in a pasture, which is going to be the better alternative. Natural is always better.
So, but I'm still curious as to the percentages. What percentage are producing the the beef in the grass-finished version versus the commercial ranchers? Is it like 5%, 2%, 10%?
Statistically, it's about 3%.
Okay.
Is the grass-fed market overall. That number is growing. It's very difficult to get a handle on that number because so many of the producers are selling direct, and so their numbers aren't really being counted anywhere. USDA is trying to get a handle on that. I don't think they ever will. Most of us independent types aren't working with the government much and aren't taking government handouts to work in our operations. So we don't necessarily want them to know our numbers, and so I don't think the USDA will ever get a real good handle on it. Overall, grass-fed beef sales has been increasing by about 20% a year for the last 6 years now. So it is the only growing segment of the beef industry as a whole.
Well, I mean, certainly you mentioned and emphasized the importance of knowing your local grower, but does the fact that it has a USDA organic certification help at all? Because are you convinced that the certification process for USDA organic is sufficient to assure the consumer that there won't be any antibiotics or hormones or unnecessary vaccines?
I'm not sold on the organic label through USDA. It's a very expensive process, and I think you can get as good or better of a product from someone who doesn't have the certification. I think the certification, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't consider it a requirement by any means. There are a lot of hoops that a producer has to jump through, but again, those are going to be government established hoops and not necessarily in the benefit of the end user. They're just what the government feels are the right things to do. And USDA hasn't been hugely concerned with the grass-fed movement other than that it's a sector of the market that they don't have a real good grasp and control over, and that part they don't really care for.
Okay. Now, some individuals viewing this interview may not have actually tasted grass-fed beef before, so I'm wondering if you could comment on the taste issues, because obviously it's a big part of purchasing food, and especially an expensive one like beef.
Sure.
So, are there any tips on that, or is it because I would suspect that a large portion of the taste is going to be involved in how the butcher, or not the butcher, but the finisher is taking care of the product. So maybe you can comment on that.
The finishing is a part of it. It's also going to be genetics. It's also going to be your mineralization and what kind of minerals you're using. So there are a number of things that go into the flavor profile of a grass-fed product. Beef really should be looked at a lot like wine is. So it's got regional differences. It's got a lot of variation in products. So it is a trial and error kind of process. And there's going to be some you like and some you don't like. A friend of mine, Mark Schatzker, wrote a book called Steak, One Man's Journey for the Perfect Piece of Beef, or something of that nature. And in that book, Mark says he's not a producer, he's a writer. And in that book, he says that the absolute best steak he's ever had in his life was a grass-fed steak. But also in that book, he says the absolute worst steak he's ever had in his life was a grass-fed steak. So there is a big variance in grass-fed product. How they're finishing, what kind of minerals they're on, the genetics of the animal, size of the animal, all those things play a factor in that finished product. Season of the year plays a role because of the grasses that are growing or not growing are going to change that flavor profile.
So are there any recommendations you can give to us to identify that other than trial and error?
It's going to be trial and error to a large degree. There's not a way to look at a piece of steak and know that piece is going to be good and this piece isn't by a visual standard. So it is, you like a lot of things, you look for recommendations from others. You talk to the producer and just have to sample it and see. You start with a ground beef or something to start with, so you're starting with a lower price point. And sample it and see if you like the ground beef, then you're probably going to like the steaks as well.
Okay, good approach. Can you tell us a bit about the ranchers who are utilizing your network, the grass-fed network, in teaching, and how many are involved and what's your anticipated projections on the growth of this process?
It's fun to watch the growth of the grass-fed world. Ranchers historically are not real technologically advanced people, so it started off a bit slow getting them involved in something online that's more technologically involved. But we've had hundreds of producers that have been involved in anywhere from operations that are just selling, as I said, one or two head, or not selling any yet. We've got some that are involved that are just trying to figure out where do I lease or buy land? Do I even lease or do I buy? And in what direction to go from the very beginning, to those that have been producers for a number of years and trying to make a transition from conventional to grass-fed. And size is pretty varied, from slaughtering hundreds of animals a year to just a few. The Lord willing, the desire to learn and be better at that production model continues to grow, and there are a number of people out there that are doing trainings. Most of them, though, are going to be at seminars, which I know you've done a number of seminars, but not everybody has the time to take a break from the animals and go spend 2 or 3 days at a conference. And that was kind of the thinking of the network, is to give them the ability to get an hour to a 2-hour long training every month, but be able to download it and put it on their phone or put it on a whatever and listen to it on the go.
So most of your training is online?
All of it, yes.
All of it, okay. That's interesting.
And not only, going back to knowing your producer, if at all possible, you should go visit your producer's place and go see, what is he doing? What does it look like? Is it a well-run operation? I mean, not that you need to understand agriculture, but if you go out there, is it a place that you don't mind going to, or do you look around and it's dirty and he's got stuff laying everywhere and he doesn't look well taken care of, and fences are in kind of disarray? I mean, what kind of producer is he, and how does he run his operation? So if you can visit, that's a great way to go, and you'll get a lot more out of that even than talking to him.
Okay, that's helpful. Do you have now you've got this grass-fed network. Do you have a list of people who are part of that network that people can access? And then also, how would someone connect their local producer to your network?
Sure. Well, the network is just grassfednetwork.com, so you can find it online any time. I have not released the names of those that are learning there, but there are a number of places, and you're familiar with them, I'm sure, as well, where you can find producers. Eat Wild is a great resource for that. I've also been heavily involved in an actual conference that we've been doing in the Midwest, which Gabe Brown and I have been on the board of, Grass-Fed Exchange. People are learning there. So I haven't been concerned about publishing the names of those that are involved. That may be something to consider. Although I don't visit these guys, so I don't know what their operation looks like, and
Sure.
talk to them. So it would be tough for me to recommend them per se. Whereas you look at an Eat Wild, for instance, and they fill out the profile before they get listed on the site, but it's still up to you as the consumer to go out and see, are they really doing what they say they're doing, or are they just trying to participate in the growing sector of the market?
Okay, so if someone has a local producer, they could just refer them to your website, and there's instructions on how they could get your training.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great.
And contact information, if they want to visit, I'm happy to talk with anybody about their operations or what specifically they have going on, those kinds of things.
Okay. Well, you've done a magnificent job in providing this resource to help provide us with a higher quality food, and we really appreciate it. So are there any last comments you'd like to make before we close?
I'm pretty staunch in sticking with local. I think local is important. We're getting more and more global, and we need to draw it back in a little bit and support our local economy, and we do that by buying from local people as much as possible. So farmers markets are a great place to find the product, and you can obviously talk with producers there, whether it's produce or beef or lamb or whatever the case may be. It's just getting to know those people and knowing what they're doing and supporting our local economies. And I think that's a great start for helping support our overall economy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Joey. Appreciate all your information and the time that you shared with us today.
My pleasure, Dr. Mercola. I appreciate the effort that you put in and all the work that you do to try to get quality information out.